When was the last time you had the chance to listen into a conversation with an accomplished CEO who led a mission-driven business? Well, today is that day. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited to have my guest here. I'll introduce him here in just a second. But, we have often said here that our goal is to have leadership experts and expert leaders. And today we absolutely have an expert leader. His name is Mark Bertolini. Mark was the chairman and CEO of Aetna, a Fortune 500 health insurance company from 2010 to 2018. He regularly appears on the national media to talk about high minimum wages, the importance of well-being in our lives, and the importance of universal health care. He's here in part today to talk about his new book, Mission-Driven Leadership: My Journey as a Radical Capitalist. And I can tell you, I've read the book. It's the first thing he asked me, by the way, when we started chatting, and I have read it, and I'm excited to have you here. Mark, welcome. Glad to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All right. So your book is not really a biography, and yet there's a lot of biographical stuff in it. And so we'll get to a couple of those major events later, critical junctures, in a minute. But I'd just like for you to talk a little bit about sort of the career path that takes you from growing up in Detroit and ending up leading a Fortune 50 company. Just take us kind of quickly through that path. I think people are interested to just sort of see how people navigated through all that.
Well, yeah, I grew up the oldest of six. There were six of us in 7 years. The first three were boys. We were 21 months apart. Dad was Italian, mom was Irish. And so we grew up in this household that at one time had 6 teenagers in it. We had one bathroom, and I slept in the breezeway that overlooked the garage. Everybody had to come through my room to get back and forth around the house. So that was sort of my existence. And so the idea was, as any, Italian family, Italian-Irish family, let's just do a little bit better than the old man did, and have an existence that's, fair, fun, good day's work, fair wages, and we'll be fine. And that was sort of the trajectory I headed on. Got into school, found I was gifted in that I have a good mathematical mind and a photographic memory, and then went to college because my mother wanted me to be a doctor. Found that
like a lot of mothers, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it was better than being a priest. Thought about that for a while too, and found I didn't want to be a doctor. Tried, I think, flunked out of school twice. Ended up working in the auto plants. Got in a fight with my union steward over a work rule that I had changed to make my job easier. Said, how do I get your job? And ended up going back to school because he said, kid, you need a degree. And that's why I went back to school. And it's been sort of a weird trajectory since then. But
you got fired by your mother too.
My mother fired me. My father fired me.
Your father fired you and your mother fired you. That's right.
Yeah. My father fired me and rehired me back for less.
I loved that story. My dad and your dad were not alike in many, many ways, but I could see him having that exact conversation with me. So tell everybody. So it's not like an inside story. Tell everybody that story real quick, because I think it's a great story. First of all.
So I'm 13 years old. I'm in a high school that has to do 2 shifts a day for school because it's overcrowded. On the east side of Detroit, in a town called St. Clair Shores. And my dad at the age of 13 says, you're in high school now, time to go to work. And he says, you can catch the bus out in front of the school. You can take it down to Shaner and 9 Mile Road, walk, half a mile in, and you can be at the shop And my dad was the foreman in a pattern making shop. They make patterns for machines that build automobiles. And he said, you can, sweep and clean the bathrooms and wash the floors and paint the walls and do all that other sort of stuff. So he hires me for $1.25. And, I'm working my butt off, and I'm spending money, helping out at home, doing those other sorts of things. And there's another guy working there named Jerry. And Jerry and I, I'm about a year in, I'm out back smoking a cigarette with Jerry. Shouldn't have been, but back then it was a different time. And Jerry tells me he's making $4.25 an hour. I said, wait a minute. I'm working circles around Jerry. He's in his early 20s. I go back into my dad. I say, hey, Dad, Jerry's making $4.25. He's making $3 more an hour than I am. I want a raise. And he goes, well, what are you going to do if I don't give you one? I said, well, I'm going to quit. And he goes, and do you have another job? I said, no. He says, you're stupid. You're fired. Go home. So I go down, get on the bus, go home. He comes home that night, and every night we had current events around the table. As I got older, it was the Vietnam War. My cousin was over in Nam as a paratrooper, and he says, why don't you stay around the table after we're done here? And he says, I want to tell you about Jerry. Jerry's a great guy. He's got a wife, a child. This is the best he's going to do. He's kind of slow, and I'm helping Jerry support his family. So that's why he's getting paid what he's getting paid. And you're getting paid what you're getting paid because you're 13. And you got a whole career in front of you. And it's a good job, and you can hang around the shop, and you can hang around with me. But that's all you're going to get. I said, wow. And he goes, you want your job back? I said, yeah. He goes, great, $1 an hour. And he cut my pay. And he said to me, and I tell this to people all the time that come in and say, I'm not getting paid enough, which always makes me sort of chuckle. I say to them, never count anybody else's money. As long as you're being fairly compensated or feel you're being fairly compensated for what you do, you should be happy.
Yep, because you don't know the other side of that coin, right? And that's one of the lessons your dad taught you that day. So, I think in everyone's journey, Mark, there are moments or events that shape us. You had two major life-changing events that you talk about in the book, and we are talking about Mark Bertolini's book, Mission Driven Leadership. You had two of those events, and I'd like you to talk about them briefly, and then to say how did they change you as a leader, because you talk about that some in the book as well. But can you talk? I know they are hard events to talk about, but if you'd be willing to do that, I think everyone would be blessed if you would.
So I'm in my home gym working out, and my son comes upstairs to see me, and I always went over his grades and his homework with him and used to give him feedback on his performance. And
that's shocking right there, Mark.
You think? Yeah. And he says, Dad, the stock on Cigna's way down. What did you do? What's wrong with you guys? It's costing the family money. And he's 16 at the time, and he's standing there, and he grabs one of the weights and pushes it over his head, and he has these red spots under his arms. And I said, what's that? He goes, did your mother change the detergent? No, it's something. And I looked really close, and it was petechiae, which is a sign of a liver problem or a spleen problem. And so we got to get you to the doctor. And they did a bunch of tests, couldn't find anything. They were going to take the spleen out. Susan and I go to get a Harrison's internal medicine test. And we look up, this enlarged spleen issue. And there's all these diseases it could be. And at the very bottom, there's this thing called T-cell gamma delta lymphoma, extremely rare, always fatal. And we said, well, let's hope it's not that one. Well, we take him to the doctor, and the hematologist says, I've never seen that one before, because we're asking him about it. I said, but there's a simple way to test for it. Let's look. And sure enough, he had it. And he said, he's got 6 months left. So we take him around to meet doctors, and we find a doctor in Boston who is a really inventive doctor. Ava Guinan is her name. She's brilliant, still there. And she says, this is a terrible disease, bad luck. There's only one way I can think about fixing T-cell lymphoma, is if we do a bad bone marrow transplant, which creates graft versus host disease, which kills T cells. And now it's going to be terrible.
Kill the bad ones, right? Basically, if we can kill the bad ones, maybe we got a shot.
Maybe we got a shot. And if you can survive this, which is, your skin starts to slough off, you can't eat. If we can survive that, you could live. So I said to him, "Do you want to do it?" And he said, "Well, I'll do it, Dad, but if you do it with me." And so we put together a plan, went to Boston, had this bone marrow transplant. It worked. He got really sick after that. And actually, the bone marrow transplant worked fine. It was the graft versus host disease that took, a year to get rid of. And so we were in the hospital constantly fighting day in and day out. It got really bad. He was bleeding out this total body volume of blood through his gut every day. At one point, and they said, this isn't going to work anymore. And we had these huge fights. I had fights with the attending physician where he'd say, "You know what, why don't we just do a do not resuscitate?" And I said, "You know what, I'm in the room with him. If that moment comes along, I'll make that call. But you don't need an automatic, get out of jail free card to do this. I'll be around." And they kept pressing me. So one day they called in and they said, "We just can't keep him going anymore." So we put him in hospice. And we went through all the planning with him about what do you want his funeral to be like, all those sorts of things. And there's this doctor. I said, I'm convinced it wasn't the GVH. I was convinced he was starving because his albumin was really low. And I got this Harrison Satoral medicine text. I meet with the doctors every morning and say, "Okay, where do I find it? What do I do next? Show me the charts." I'm on the NIH, and my wife and I are on the NIH PubMed website talking to NIH doctors at the National Institutes of Health because this is such a rare disease. And the doc says, "You know what? There is, I said, he's allergic to soy. We can't give him intralipids fat to replenish his system. There's got to be one that's not a soy-based fat in Europe somewhere." She calls her nutritional professor at University of North Carolina. He tells her, "Oh yeah, John Hopkins. We got one. It's in Australia. It's in Austria." But it's not FDA approved. So go to the FDA, get a single patient compassionate use exception, go to the institutional review board, sign away any risk or liability, bring the drug in, and needless to say, he goes home in February 2003.
60 years ago. His life is twice as long now as it was then, right?
Twice as long as it was then. He's got, a child already, my first granddaughter. He's got another one on the way. He has his issues from time to time with all the fallout of that kind of cure and disease, but he's still cancer-free, knock on wood. He's studying his first PhD at University of New Hampshire, and he's living the life he's always wanted to live. He always told me, "I never want to be a big shot business guy like you, Dad. I don't need a big house. I just want to live in a community where I can teach and be in a small community where my kids can go to the park and have fun." And that's what he's doing. So, it was a good save.
It was a good save for sure. And then about a year after he got out, in fact, if I remember right, a year to the day after he got out of the hospital,
Yep,
you had an accident.
Yeah, I hit a tree skiing, going very fast.
I was going to say going very fast. That left you with a lot of challenges. And I really, not to shortchange that at all,
Yeah,
Mark, but to slide forward, because in the book you talk some about your leadership style before that, and then you certainly talk some more about your leadership style after that. And I think I guess this is why, well, I'll come back to that. What changed through those two moments, or not really events, I guess? What really changed about how you thought about leading and how you actually led? Because you did go back.
I did go back, and what I always kept myself in very good physical shape. I was out of central casting from the standpoint of what should a leader look like, what does a future CEO look like. And after the accident, I had all sorts of physical injuries and pain and difficulty concentrating, and so I had to rely more on others. And prior to that, I ultimately got through undergrad. It took me 8 years. My brother John, who's 11 months behind me, always likes to tell people that my brother Mark was a sophomore when I joined Wayne State University, and he was a sophomore when I left. And my brother John went on to do criminal justice and work down in law enforcement in Texas. And so, but then I went to the Ivy League, and I had a pedigree education in finances and MBA at Cornell University, and I had all the answers. Had all the tools, had all the answers, out of central casting. what do I need all these other people for if I could just tell them what to do? That just go do this, they'll be fine. And what happened was I couldn't work that pace anymore. I had to deal with my pain. I had to take as much care of myself first before I could lead and take care of others. And I had to rely on others to fill in the gaps when I missed a few. And so all of a sudden I had to be more participative. I had to listen more. And you know what? The decisions got better. The work got easier. The stress reduced a lot. And I said, wow, this is actually easier to do if you surround yourself with good people and give them the room to run and pay them well.
And we're going to come back to that giving them room to run piece in a minute. I said earlier that this is an inspirational book. I shared that with you. And I wrote to a group of our customers this morning about the importance of inspiration and that I talked about this book that I read last night as a source of it. So how do you, I believe that, you talked in the book, I think in the book you said potato chips in, potato chips out, I think is what you said. And so, we all hear garbage in, garbage out. And what I wrote this morning to people was, inspiration in, inspiration out. And so what is something that, how do you gain inspiration, Mark?
Well, I think I read a lot. I work on my mental heuristic, my view of how the world works. And for a long time, until probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less ago, I would always do 2 nights a week with dinner with people I didn't know, just so I could build a network, but I could also learn. So I never stopped learning. And you pick up all these bits and pieces and you start formulating them in your own head. And if you keep the heuristic current and expansive, then you tend to see more looking around corners. You tend to have an ability to contribute. And that was always a style, even though I always thought I had the right answers, that was always a style I engaged in. And so my inspiration comes from talking to other people who help me advance my own thinking, because then it sets off triggers. And I've had that happen in Washington, D.C. and in other places where people plant something. I go, I think about it for a while. I go, wait a minute. It's sort of like my German Shepherd puppy that lives with me here. Whenever she has a learning experience, you put her in her box for a while and they just sit there and think, and they incorporate it into their thinking. And so it was like, that's the way I sort of learned. How does this fit? Why does it matter? And that's the inspiration. So it's been a lot of people. I like to say I'm a mosaic of all the really cool people I've met. My life.
So sorry, but I'm channeling our listeners here, and they're saying, sure, it's easy for the CEO to find interesting people to have dinner with 2 nights a week that he doesn't know. So that's a brilliant strategy. What advice would you have for anyone listening or watching us about how to do that? Like, can you take another step on that?
Yeah, all the people I met, I notice I said 10 years ago, that was before I was CEO. And so I always tell people, we have college students in for the summer, we have graduate students in to do special projects. And when I meet with them all on their first day, I meet with all of our new employees in any management level on their first day in groups as part of our introduction to Aetna program. And I say to them at the end of it, they say, well, how do we learn from people like you? I said, I'll put the offer out. Call my office and set up an appointment, come to see me. Or stop by and grab a cup of coffee. I'd be more than happy to spend time with you. And, executive and, the executive problem is like, a beautiful person's problem when they can't get dates. It's sort of nobody wants to hang around with you.
No one shows up.
Yeah, right. I mean, I can tell with you, Kevin, it must be tough. And so,
because I'm so reserved.
Yeah, that is right. You're so quiet. You don't push hard. And so this idea that just call and pick up the phone and ask somebody, you'd be amazed at how many people say, "Okay, that's a great idea. Be happy to see you." I do it every time.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you for taking that extra step there. So the book is called Mission Driven Leadership. So what is that besides just the title of the book?
So there's one of the things I talk about in the book are the 4 levels of Taoist leadership. And at the first level, the lowest level of Taoist leadership, the people you lead hate you. The second level is the people you lead fear you. The third level.
Let's hope that the people listening or watching us are at neither of those levels or are quickly moving through them.
Right. Or no, but I bet you there are a lot of people that know people like that.
Oh,
right.
Right.
So the third level is people praise you and respect you. But the fourth level is you become invisible. And so when we did our employee investment programs, I pushed the first 2. The rest of them were always somebody else's idea that I never said no to. I said no to mini ponies. But other than the mini ponies, I said yes to everything. And I said, bring it. Just keep bringing it. It made my job so much easier. I didn't have to ask anymore. The organization got it. Wait a minute, we can take care of each other? Wait a minute, we should worry about how we are doing? We should make sure that Jim over there or Susie over there are doing well in their work, and it's our job to do that, not yours? Yeah, that's right. And when you get to that level, it's a joy to lead an organization like that because everybody's thinking the same way and everybody's working hard to do it. Now, Aetna was never perfect, and I'm sure there are a lot of listeners that'll say, well, Aetna wasn't the experience I had with Aetna. And, we have that. But I view it as a progressive elimination of failure. Not absolute perfection every minute. And so we can find it and continue to make it better and better and better. We can do better, but it's everybody's job to do it. And then leadership, it becomes mission driven. We all understand the mission. We all know what we're doing. We all know why we're here, and that we're going to do everything we can to make that a reality.
Cool. And I will take another step for y'all. And for you happen to be watching, I'll show you the book again. I've never read a book written by a corporate CEO or former corporate CEO who devoted an entire chapter about somebody else. And there's a chapter at the end of the book, The Miracle on 134th Street, I think it is. You might get the street number right. That is all about somebody else, and it's all about this idea of mission-driven leadership. And one more reason that I think the book is worth reading. So there's one other chapter that I really want us to talk about for a minute, Mark, and it's a chapter that I think we are in complete agreement on, but I really would love your take on. And the chapter title is Trust Begets Trust. So what do you mean by that? And then secondly, how would you translate that to a leader? Not everyone listening is in the shoes that you just left, right? Mm-hmm. So how would you translate that idea for a leader at any level?
Well, I think one of the biggest absent attributes in a leader is courage. The courage to take a step first versus waiting for somebody else to take the step. And too often our leaders don't move because they don't want to look like the odd person out. You can pick them in government, you can pick them in business. I even call out some of my fellow CEOs in the book who, when the tax benefit came, they gave everybody a bonus. They didn't increase their wages. They cheaped out. They took the easy step instead of investing in the people in their organization. So this idea of trust is much like love. You don't get love unless you give it. It's kind of hard to expect love and not give it first. And that's always a scary part. Same thing with trust. And you don't get trust unless you give it first. And so Dov Seidman, who I note in the book, writes this book about the how. Mm-hmm. And it's really about this issue of how do we build a trust in an organization where we allow people to make mistakes. We allow people to do things. We don't stand over them, making sure they're doing the right things all the time. And there are a number of examples I give about, expense reports. We'd have legions of people in the organization doing expense reports. And it was sort of like, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Why don't we just trust people to submit real expenses, do audits from time to time, and, do a roadkill demonstration if somebody cheats and steals, instead of the other way around, assuming everybody's going to cheat and steal, so we need to make sure they're not doing it. Or the other one I like is our moment of truth in every health insurance company is at 12:01 a.m. on January 1st. Somebody goes to a pharmacy with a script and the eligibility is screwed up for some reason. Could be us, could be them, could be their employer, could be the pharmacy, could be anybody. And They walk in and they say, I'm sorry, we can't fill the script. because you're not eligible.
It'll be $312, right?
Or even sometimes $8 for
Right.
a product, right? So I said to the team, what do you think the chances are that a mother of 4 is going to get out of whatever clothes they're in, show up at the pharmacy at 12:01 a.m., miss the big party, looking for an antibiotic for their child who's been up all night with a fever crying, and they're stealing from us? What do you think the chances of that are? Why don't we just trust them? Now, somebody comes in and says they're an incredible plane, they got glitter all over their face, they got streamers hanging off of them, they're looking for 20 OxyContin. Now you can ask them a question about, we don't think you're eligible here. But, let's believe people and see if we get the trust back. And I mentioned this at an all-employee meeting, and our employees in Tampa created a whole new trust model that's called Service Without Borders, where they created a whole organizational support that now is run company-wide, where our frontline people make the 5 most common decisions that otherwise had to go to some executive in a suit somewhere to make a decision earlier before. We let them do it. And we trust that they're going to do the right thing by the customer. So trust begets trust.
It sure does. I say that trust is a noun and a verb, and the more of the verb that you do, the more of the noun you get. So this is exactly what you're saying. So this is an interesting book, everybody. We've talked about a couple of the pieces. There's leadership lessons here, of course. There is some autobiographical stuff, which you have a picture of. And then there's a whole last chapter, which we're not going to have time to go dive into, from a guy who's seen healthcare at the highest levels, thinking about what the future could look like different. It's not political. So I tell you what, it was enlightening to me to think about that, some new things in new ways there. And so one more reason for you all to pick up a copy of the book. So before we go, I have a couple more things, Mark. I have this thing that I do. I know you were a skier and maybe not a basketball fan, but I have this thing that I call the fast break. So I have 3 ideas I'm going to share with you. And the fast break, by the way, everyone, is brought to you by our leadership development program called The Remarkable Way. And you can learn more about that. Get on a list to learn more by going to remarkablepodcast.com/way. But the fast break, Mark, is 3 ideas that are somewhat random. And I just want your initial take on them. You don't need to go into long depth, but what is your first take on these ideas? Are you ready?
Yes.
First one is decision making.
What the idea is decision making?
What is your thought? What would your initial thoughts be? What would you say? What are your thoughts about decision making and what lessons?
One of the untold secrets in my book about my success is that I always viewed that 9 out of 10 people sitting in a room waiting for a meeting was looking for somebody else to make the decision. And if you made it and you put a good management process around it, you'd be a winner.
There you go. See, that's how to do this. Next one is, what are your thoughts, or what comes to your mind if I say employee engagement?
Employee engagement is a customer centricity and a mission towards dealing and helping the customer. That's employee engagement. And helping each other help the customer, and not being afraid of pushing up and saying, we're not doing the right thing for our customers.
And lastly, since we've got a CEO, I should probably ask about strategy. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, so strategy is not, so CEOs should have their head in the clouds and their feet on the ground. So strategy is only good as its ability to be implemented. And so if you have a great idea and you think it's a great strategy, try and work it all the way through to what it would look like in action at the customer level, and then bring it back and say, is it still a good strategy? Because a strategy is nothing unless it meets an unmet customer need on the part of the customer efficiently, effectively, credibly, and affordably.
There you go, everybody. So I just have 3 more questions for you, and they're the easiest ones of the day. Mark, the first one is, I know, everybody knows that you liked to ski. That's not something I believe that you can do now. But what are some things you do now for fun?
Well, I do ski.
Okay, so I was wrong.
I'm back on my skis.
Awesome.
I ski without poles. I ride motorcycles, so I have 3 Harleys and a Ducati that I ride around. I love to hike, and I ride my bicycle all over town here in Manhattan, but also my wife and I rode from La Rochelle, France to Santiago, Spain on our bicycles, did the Camino de Santiago on our bikes, and which is in essence the pilgrimage, 1,280 miles. So
So, okay. So doing the Camino, I'm looking over here because we had a guest who did it and wrote a book about it. And if I can find it, we'll make sure we put it in the show notes. So if any of you are interested in that or don't know anything about it or do know something about it, want to know more about it, we will get that. I can't find it quickly enough right now. So we'll get that in the show notes if you want to go back and take a listen to that episode. There's another episode that has just recently come out as well about a book called Crucible Leadership, from a person who had an extraordinarily epic fail, not physically like Mark's, but it was episode number 152. So if this has been interesting to you, everyone might find that one interesting with Warwick Fairfax.
My wife Mari she's a Gallega, and so she's walked it twice herself. The last time she wanted to go, I said, I can't spend 2 months walking. She goes, well, let's do it on our bikes. That was a big mistake, but it was a lot of fun.
And he walked it. So, but it's and I don't have time. I don't want to mess everybody up and take too much time to find it, but we'll put it in the show notes for everybody. Next question, Mark, you said you're a reader. I know you're doing a book challenge this year. What's something you're reading now or have recently read that people might find interesting?
There's a great book called Simply Electrifying. It's about the history of electricity. It's absolutely amazing. And it takes you all the way back to Benjamin Franklin, through Faraday, through Tesla, Edison, the whole evolution. And you look at the world today, and aside from the fact that blue light has destroyed our sleep for centuries to come, it's really amazing the critical and pivotal role electricity has played in our lives and how we need to think differently about it as we move through climate change. Great book.
Simply Electrifying. Thanks so much. So, Mark, where can people learn more about you and the book? Where do you want to point people? Anything at all you want to say? For those watching, I'll hold it up one more time.
It's on Amazon. It's on I have an author central page, so you can find out more about me, pictures of me and the family and the dog, all sorts of cool stuff. So if you go out there, you can find it.
And we'll have all that in the show notes as well. So now a question for all of you who have been listening to us, and it's the question I ask you every week, and that's now what? What from this are you going to do? Because being entertained and maybe being inspired is great, but taking action on something and making it make a difference for you is what you really came here for. And so my challenge to you is, what are you going to do? Are you going to invite someone to dinner this week? Are you going to read something differently? Are you going to think differently about how you trust as a leader? What from this conversation are you going to take action on? Because until you do that, this wasn't a whole lot more than a nice warm bath. So, Mark, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure. It really was. I enjoyed the book. I'm glad that we had the chance to chat.
Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me. Great show. I love the idea. Keep it up.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody, before I go, we would love to have you join in the conversation and get updates about what we're doing here and have a hand in how this podcast continues to evolve. And in fact, if you've got a guest idea, send it to us. You can do all that at the Facebook group. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook to learn how to do that. And we'll be back next week, just like every week, right here with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.